In the early days of my channel, most of my videos were about various RPGs from Japan that were coming out at the time, and I also had no idea what I was doing when it came to videography. Since then, I've learned a lot, the Ryuutama community has done a lot, and also seen a lot of new faces. So with all that said, let's revisit Ryuutama, the role-playing game affectionately referred to as Hayao Miyazaki's Oregon Trail. And to clarify, this game has no affiliation with Studio Ghibli. Ryuutama is described as a natural fantasy role-playing game. It's set in a world where all natural phenomena are caused by dragons, who are fed with the stories of travelers that are collected by the Ryuujin, dragon-like people who follow people that go on journeys. Coincidentally, in the world of Ryuutama, everybody at one point in their life is expected to go on a journey, with their friends, family, and neighbors helping them prepare for this journey, monetarily or otherwise. Another way to put it is that it's a light-hearted inversion of Dungeons & Dragons, where instead of being wizards and warriors crawling through caves and battling beasts so that you can pilfer and plunder, you're merchants and minstrels cruising through the countryside, seeing sights, lounging with locals, and being humbled by hardships. Most of the challenge of Ryuutama comes from preparing for and surviving the journey, and most of the fun comes from working together to create the world. Ryuutama uses the standard 7 set of polyhedral dice. If you've ever seen the dice Dungeons & Dragons players use, that's what Ryuutama uses. The backbone of Ryuutama relies on rolling 2 dice that correspond to your character's stats and trying to meet or beat a certain number. Characters, by the way, have 4 stats: Strength, Dexterity, Intelligence, and Spirit. Strength is physical might and healthiness. It affects your hit points and how much you can carry. Dexterity is your hand-eye coordination. It doesn't directly affect any other stats, but is used in quite a few different roles, such as most fighting roles as well as travel roles. Intelligence is your ability to make sense of the world around you. It affects navigation and magic rolls. Spirit is a character's willpower, focus, and bravery. It affects magic points and magic rolls. Most roles can be represented by some mix of 2 different stats, or 1 stat twice if necessary. This chart demonstrates some possible combinations of stats and what tasks they'd be used for. Additionally, if both your dice come up as either 6 or their highest facing side, you get a critical success and automatically succeed. By contrast, both dice coming up 1 causes a fumble, an automatic failure with any equipment involved in the check getting damaged. In addition, everyone in the party gains a fumble point, which allows a character to focus on a roll and possibly roll higher. Focusing uses up either a fumble point or half a character's current MP and allows them to add 1 to the result of a roll. And if the character uses both half their MP and a fumble point, they instead add 3 to that end result. This, altogether, means that getting a fumble can ultimately work out for the benefit of the entire party. But, with all that said, let's move on to character creation. There's 3 major choices you make that define your character in Ryuutama. The first among them being what stats you're going to have. You pick from one of 3 different stat arrays. These will determine what values you can assign to your stats. The arrays are the average set, which is 4 6s, the standard set, which is a 4, 2 6s, and an 8, or the specialist set, 2 4s and 2 8s. These stats can be increased through the course of play, and when they do, it's done in increments of 2, since this represents the size of the dice you'll be rolling when you use this stat. Next, you decide upon your character's class. This determines what skills are available to you. There's a total of 7 different classes available in the core book, and each grants you 3 skills. Some skills are passive, granting some kind of bonus to certain situations, while others have a listed pair of stats that you roll before you can use them. Last but not least is your character's type. There's 3 of these to choose from: combat, technical, and magical. Combat, as its name implies, makes your character more effective at fighting, with an increase to HP, damage, and proficiency with an extra weapon. Technical gives a character various useful abilities, such as a higher carrying capacity, a bonus to their initiative in combat, and an enhanced version of Focus, where instead of getting a +1 for a fumble point or half their MP, they get a +2. Magic-type characters are the only ones able to use magic in Ryuutama. They gain a bonus to their MP, as well as access to 2 kinds of magic: incantations and seasonal magic. For incantations, a character starts with their choice of 2 low-level spells from the incantation list, and gains an additional 2 every level. Seasonal magic, however, is much more generous. They pick a season and gain access to all the magic for that season that they meet the level requirements for. Some other choices that you'll make during character creation include your character's weapon of choice, their reason for traveling, and if there's a particular item that exemplifies who they are, like a favorite coin purse for a merchant, or a hand mirror for a particularly vain noble. There's 2 things that really make up Ryuutama as a game: the travel rules and equipment, and the 2 sort of go hand in hand. Travel rules are a fine example to demonstrate Ryuutama's core mechanic, as well as the overall backbone of the game's structure. Condition check is the first thing you do when a character starts their day. This is done by rolling Strength and Spirit. The result is then recorded as that character's condition, and it represents how well a character is feeling after resting. Condition is used to resist bad status effects, as well as to resist magical effects. And if a character's condition is 10 for a given day, they can temporarily raise the level of one of their stats, representing that they feel great that day. For example, if you score 10 on condition and want to raise your intelligence of 4, you would bump it up to 6. Direction check follows the condition check, and this is done by only one person in the party. This is intelligence and intelligence, meaning you roll 2 dice of whatever your intelligence is. This is compared to the level of the terrain you're traveling through, and if you succeed, you proceed through the terrain at your normal speed. However, failure will slow the party down. It's not unusual for a roll to require using the same stat twice. So going back to our previous example, if our 4 intelligence character were to attempt a direction check, they would roll 2 4-sided dice. The travel check is done by everybody in the party, and literally represents them traveling along. The roll for this is strength and dexterity, and like navigation, it's against the terrain level that you're traveling through. Failure with this step reduces your character's HP by half, where success means you travel without incident. This is primarily how characters in Ryuutama get wounded. The camping check is the final check of an in-game day, and is done by only one character. This represents finding a suitable place to set up a tent, as well as the act of setting up the tent and starting a campfire. Successful rolls for the camp check will double every character's current HP, while an unsuccessful one will only restore 2. This is a reliable way to restore HP, so don't worry if you wound yourself during the travel check. At the end of an adventuring day, every character needs to consume 1 unit of food and 1 unit of water. Anybody who fails to do so takes a cumulative -1 penalty until they get some food and water. For example, if a character goes 2 days without food and 1 day without water, they'll be at a -3 penalty to all rolls. -2 for the days without food, and -1 for the day without water. A handy summary of all these rules are found on page 102. Keep in mind, it's easy to just play through the game using the travel rules as they're written, and not doing much else. On a failed travel check, don't just say that your HP becomes halved because you failed the travel check. The travel check represents about 8 hours passing by. Something had to happen during that time. Something like a sudden calamity, like tripping while traveling down a hill and tumbling all the way down. Or something that happened over time, like realizing that your socks weren't quite protecting your feet from your shoes, leaving you with gigantic blisters on your feet that wound up bursting. Additionally, something else could happen during the day, something unrelated to the travel rules. The player characters aren't the only travelers out there in the world. They may meet another party on a journey of their own, or they'll encounter some unusual monument along the way, such as one of the dragon statues, or they come to a crossroads with no way of knowing which path will lead them where. Equipment also plays a large part in Ryuutama, both mechanically and from a role-playing perspective. While many items don't offer any clear in-game benefit, they're still the sort of things that one might want to have just as a matter of course. Things like soap, eating utensils, or flint and steel for starting fires. Much of the gear does impact the game though, either by allowing characters to carry more things, or giving bonuses to traveling in certain environments. Another important thing to remember about equipment is this: gear that a character has equipped or is otherwise wearing doesn't count towards their carrying capacity. Within reason, of course. Wearing 3 hats is kinda stupid, and in any universe, it's also counterproductive. The final thing I want to mention about Ryuutama is the Ryuujin. As I mentioned at the start, the Ryuujin is a being that follows travelers and records their journeys. And the Ryuujin can be classified into one of 4 types, based on their color and what kind of stories they like to collect. And there's a reason for this. The Ryuujin are a character meant specifically for the GM, and the Ryuujin's color is a great shorthand for setting the expectation of the game to the players. Another unusual trait of the Ryuujin is that, like player characters, the Ryuujin can level up, granting them new abilities. They are a full-fledged character, much like one of the player characters. This trait of Ryuutama will likely strike some of you as weird or even poor design, but it serves an important purpose. In addition to setting the stage for what players can expect, the Ryuujin also gives permission to the Game Master to deviate from the scenario, or to bend the rules of the game a little bit. You see, in Japan, Game Masters seldom deviate from the rules of the game. They see the rules as strict guidelines that aren't meant to be broken. Normally, during the course of a scenario, if the players find themselves going through the game with too much or too little difficulty, the Game Master just continues the game as normal, with no changes whatsoever to the scenario, even if it's a scenario they came up with themselves. Atsuhiro Okada, the creator of Ryuutama, included the Ryuujin, their ability to level up, and their ability to help or hinder the players to ease GMs into the idea of changing their scenarios on the fly. In fact, Ryuutama is a fairly unique game as far as Japanese RPGs go. It's one of the few games from Japan that uses the full polyhedral set, since it's more common for Japanese games to either use the humble D6, a D10, or even decks of cards. This is because for the longest time, polyhedral dice were really expensive in Japan, sometimes costing the equivalent of over 100 USD. By contrast, ordinary 6-sided dice were much easier to acquire. So when Japan's gaming culture was developing, 6-sided dice became their go-to, usually used in pairs. And Ryuutama factors into this by being a game created by the owner of a gaming cafe, a place specifically set up for people to play RPGs, complete with books, pencils, dice, all on loan. Buying a set of polyhedrals? Expensive. Borrowing? Much easier. The final question remains though. Is Ryuutama worth getting into? On all accounts, yes. Whether you're new to tabletop RPGs or well-versed in them, whether you've only been a player or are an experienced GM, this is a game worth playing. For novices, it gives enough structure to guide you into what you should be doing, but leaves plenty of details open to your own interpretation, giving ample opportunity to learn about how to improvise. Additionally, this game is great for experts who may be more used to role-playing games that have a greater emphasis on combat. Most of the rules and challenge from Ryuutama instead come from the logistics of making a journey. And if you happen to like modifying games and pushing the limits of what can be done with them, Ryuutama has a very active community dedicated to making new things. Things such as general expansions offering additional classes, types, and other such things, or just a compendium of all types of egg monsters. I'm not saying Ryuutama is perfect by any means, but it's definitely a great game if you're new, want to try something new, or just want to get back to the basics. Thanks for watching. If you thought this was interesting or helpful, give me a thumbs up like. And if you want to learn more about other games from Japan or around the world, hit the subscribe button. With all that said, I am Aro Derashero. Stay comfy.